Adair, and today is February 23rd, and I am calling our special board meeting. It's a work session to order. Mr. Treasurer, please call the roll.
President Adair.
Present.
Ms. Beckerly.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
I am here.
Mr. Cole.
Present.
Dr. Pierce.
She is actually coming in right now. Maybe come back to her in a second.
All right, Mr. Ragland.
Here.
Vice President Reyes.
Excused.
Excused. And Dr. Pierce.
Still says she's joining. Okay, well, we'll get her when she comes in then. We have quorum, yes?
Yes, you do.
Okay. All right, excellent. So this evening on our agenda, we get to have a most exciting conversation with our Chief Equity Officer, Dr. Blue. I think we have been waiting on this for a while. In fact, Dr. Blue even gave us homework. And so I hope everyone did their homework and their reading and answered your questions and watched the video. And we are all ready to jump into this with her and start to talk about, what is an equity-focused vision of governance for the district. That is what our agenda is this evening. And so can I have a motion to adopt our agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
I missed who the second was, Brooke. Was that Mr.
Cole.
Board Member Cole? Thank you. All right, President Adair.
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Cole.
Yes, the second was actually Mr. Ragland.
Oh, thank you.
That's actually what I thought. Thank you very much. And Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Great. And Dr. Pierce now has joined us. I think she was having some trouble getting in. Okay, excellent. So we are going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Blue to lead us through our discussion this evening. Welcome, Dr. Blue.
Thank you, President Adair. So the first thing I'm going to do is just share my screen so that we can all be looking at the same thing. And then I have to reorient myself for you all. All right, so welcome to the discussion. As President Adair mentioned, you all had lots of homework, and I appreciate you indulging me. I think it'll really help us have a richer conversation this evening. And I'm also assuming this is probably just the first of many conversations that we'll have as we kind of tease out what does equity look like for the district. And as we go along, how do we refine the vision? What are the priorities and those sorts of things? So I really look forward to both this and our future conversations. So just to kind of get us started on our agenda, just kind of setting the purpose, which you all did a little bit of that in your homework as well. And then we'll talk about the book chapter, which is called The Journey Towards Equity and Excellence, and pull a few things out of there to kind of connect us to what a vision for equity would look like for CCS. And then look at some definitions. You all, I asked you all to kind of think about what would a definition of equity be for you. And I'd like us to kind of get on the same page about what that could be. So I kind of put all of our thoughts together, and we're going to talk some of those things through, as well as our non-negotiables. And by that, what are the things that we absolutely can't miss when we're working on this, whether it's a policy, a vision, a plan, kind of whatever the equity work looks like. What are the non-negotiables? And probably another way, maybe AJ calls it kind of a guardrail, but I didn't want to mix up the language, so I'm just using non-negotiables. And then we'll talk about what are the next steps. What else? What's our kind of our plan, or what's the beginning of our plan? So the purpose today is just to get some clarity, as I mentioned, so to kind of get some consensus around what our definition of equity is going to be that will drive the district. I've been using a definition that I've kind of borrowed from the National Equity Project, and I'll share that later as well. But, you know, if you ask 10 different people, what is equity? They may say similar words, but maybe mean different things. And so we want to just today get as much clarity as possible from you all so that as we move forward, we can know that we're saying the same thing, or we're speaking kind of the same language that you are. And mostly also to kind of distinguish how equity will be operationalized from a board standpoint. You know, in other words, what does the governance piece look like in terms of equity versus the operation side, the management, the day-to-day work that the district will do and departments and things will do. So seeing what is the both and of the board versus the rest of the district in terms of what is your work when it comes to equity. So the essential questions that are going to guide the discussion today. The first one, what does it mean to lead an equity-focused vision of governance for Columbus City Schools? And then also, what is the definition of equity that the board can really anchor itself to, that really promotes the structures and policies and practices that lead to equity, both within the district and then kind of for the district. And those are kind of two different things, but they'll both come out together. So based on that, that's kind of the direction that we'll go today in our discussion. Any questions so far or any clarification before we move into our book discussion? Okay, so if everyone has their book or their chapter copied, you can kind of pull it out for reference. You may or may not need it. I've also pulled some quotes out, but if there were some things that you want to be able to lift, then you'll be able to have your materials right with you. So using the quotes that I'm going to kind of pull out for us, I want us to kind of get into some discussion. So I know that you all are used to a sort of cadence where you may put questions in the chat and, you know, wait to be called on, that sort of thing. And that works also, but I won't necessarily be able to see all of that at once. And so it may be easier for us to, once we kind of get started, to have board members take themselves off mute, and then we can kind of all engage in discussion. So understanding that this is part presentation, but mostly discussion and mostly me kind of hearing from you all. So I want to make sure that I invite you all to unmute and be a part of a larger conversation. So as we go through the quotes, this is the question I'd like for you to think about and kind of apply it across all of the pieces of the text that we'll discuss and any other pieces of text that you may have kind of been drawn to. What can we learn from the Massachusetts experience, which is kind of what the chapter is called? What can we learn about equity-based governance, and how can we apply those learnings to the context of Columbus City Schools? So they went through a lot of things, and it's obviously it's a bit of a different context because they were looking more at statewide things, but there's still a lot of really great nuggets there that we may be able to glean from at the district level. So that's kind of the thing that I'd like for you to think about is, you know, what did you learn and how can we apply it? So would anybody care to read the first quote for me?
The challenge is to improve the Commonwealth system of public education so that each child will have the opportunity to achieve her maximum potential to go on to a productive life as a participant and a contributor to American society and the American economy. The challenge embraces all children.
Okay, so just let's start with that quote. Can I get just some reactions? How does this quote make you think differently about your work from a board member perspective?
I'll answer very quickly. I don't see where it is any different. Our mission statement is that each child is highly educated, prepared for leadership and service, and empowered for success as a citizen of a global community. I see this in direct alignment. The only difference is that it makes America the microcosm as opposed to the globe.
Good, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with Board Member Cole. I thought it was very much aligned. And just again, coming back to that idea, and remember, this kind of stuff was written in the early 90s. So then it was groundbreaking, right? So, but this idea about it being that individual child, that each child, and I think that, as Board Member Cole said, I mean, that is something that this district has picked up on, and certainly has worked through its mission in the last, 15 years or so. So, that, and to his point about being a global economy, not just American, again, I think that pushes the vision forward. But I thought it was in alignment as well.
I'm not sure that this statement alone is adequate, in part because it doesn't talk at all about differentiating the children and their needs. It doesn't specifically talk about that some students, need more, and we need to support and encourage and provide that, and that others may not need the same thing or may need something different or not as much attention.
So Board Member Brown, when you think about that differentiation that you mentioned, when you think about that from a governance perspective, what sorts of things come to mind in terms of what can the board do to support that?
I think that a couple of things that come to mind. One is for board members always to be asking questions publicly of administrators, to keep a focus not only on students, which is still paramount, but on equity and on how does this project help us in the pursuit of equity? How does this proposal help us in the pursuit of equity? I think the second thing is that when we look at expenditures, when we look at financial data, that we that we accept and understand that not every building is going to receive the same thing, that we may need to put a whole lot more money into some computers or something at one building, and the other neighborhoods are well situated, more affluent families, for example, and that's not always an easy concept. And I know we'll have people coming back and say, me too. You can't give it to them without giving to us too. And I think we need to be prepared for that as we govern, and to be able to make the right decisions in each of those circumstances.
And that's a good point, because I was going to ask that next, and anyone can feel free to jump in if you haven't yet. But when you think about the parents who will go to the media or who will start writing letters to the school board saying our school, our children, my children are not getting something that someone else is getting, and we know that does and can and may happen. So go ahead, Board Member Cole.
Clarify that question just once more for me, please.
Sure. So the question is, so what do you do when you get that pushback from those who may not be getting what they may see as a fair share of the resources?
My typical response is to identify what that caveat or what that reasoning factor is. I borrowed that from Mr. Clarno, reasons and factors, what that reasoning factor is, and then try to identify why the distinction in service would exist. When we're talking though about situations that even, me and my family have experienced in terms of certain areas of our city that have greater access to amenities, or certain portions of our city, for example, or economic strata of our city have access to supplemental supports in the district because we can afford it. The article alluded to or talks very directly to school redesign. In a 21st century system, schools must be one of the things that stuck out to me was management and use of time in this particular section, the school altering its day to ensure that there are equitable resources allotted. My kids got to enjoy the early morning and late after school services. My brain is on freeze and I can't remember what we call it.
Latchkey.
Latchkey, thank you so much. My children got to enjoy Latchkey, but that was because, you know, we could afford it. Other families can't. And to me, that is an equitable issue. To me, if a parent comes to me with that comment, that's where I'm in absolute agreement and looking to us as a board and more specifically even the administration to leverage partnerships and resources to provide those types of supports for families.
So I guess my question is those families who already have, who may be receiving fewer resources because they already have. So those are the ones who come and get on the media and say, or whatever, and say, hey, we're not getting something this other group is getting. Mind you, that is the group that we're talking about, the group that may already have those sorts of resources.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with everything everyone else has said. And I think that, part of the answer is just simply we're going to have to, be really upfront about it ahead of time so no one's surprised and everybody understands why and everybody understands the programming behind it, and then just be resolute. Because because it's important to the whole community. I mean, I think we can tie it all back to, this is about our community as a whole, and we're all members of this community, so we have to support this programming that may appear disproportionate in terms of resource allocation or financial allocation, because that's what the community needs. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have very stiff backbones about it. One quick thing that initially before we got off on this very important topic, because I think that we have to be as present with it and intentional with it as we possibly can. In answer to what does it mean as a board to make sure we're achieving this, I think we have to be really mindful about our metrics, and that the metrics are measuring individual growth and all children. And we're not sort of, it's that difference that finally makes sense to me, which didn't for a long time, between measuring proficiency and measuring growth. Because when you're measuring proficiency, kind of a group gets lumped together and we're not really focusing on the individual. And a way to make sure we're focusing on the individual is to measure each individual growth and, aggregate that data to see if we're doing well. How we measure if we're doing well. Everybody's growing.
So if I'm growing, but I'm still not meeting the expectation, then what's the metric there?
Well, then I think when we see that, we have to allocate resources again, more resources to the students that aren't meeting the expectation. But at that point, we'll be seeing them much more as individuals.
Okay. So Dr. Pierce, I just opened out my gallery to see your hand. I don't know how long it was up. My apologies, but go ahead if you have a comment.
No worries at all. So one, thank you for having this conversation with us this evening and for giving us a meaningful purpose, a meaningful lens through which to have the conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed the homework assignment.
Oh, good.
What I will say is when we get pushback from individuals and community members that will challenge the reallocation and redistribution of resources, is we must be very clear in identifying that it is a redistribution to address the inequities that exist in our community around power and privilege. We as a community have not had that conversation. And so we as a district need to be bold, need to be very clear in the language that we use when coming up against individuals who may question and may challenge this redistribution. And if we need to make the historical case, we can talk about the redlining that has happened in our neighborhoods. We can talk about the development of 670. We can talk about the distribution of different warehouses and job opportunities in certain locations and neighborhoods versus others. It is upon us to provide the historical lens through which people begin to understand why our district is moving in a position to challenge, to eliminate, and to dismantle the current structure of power and privilege that exists in our community. And so from that perspective, I think our role is to help educate the community in understanding why we are taking this action, not to justify why we're taking the action through that, right? Because then that can turn into this conversation of who's deserving of these reallocations and redistributions. And we don't want that. We don't want that to be on the shoulders of our students as they should be focused on learning, right? So I really see it as an opportunity for us to educate those other communities and individuals through the lenses of power and privilege, through the lenses of redistribution.
Wonderful. Any other comments on this one before we go to the next bit of text?
I just want to, I totally agree with Dr. Pierce on that. And it's just, that education is so critical in the way that we speak about it, because in reality, your question was this perception that, parents are going to come because somehow they think they're getting less now. And that's really not true. They're not getting less. Others are just getting something different so that everyone can actually meet the same point. So, the idea of equity is a tool to get to equality, to overcome things that created the inequities in the beginning. So we really can't talk about it in ways of people getting more or less. It's getting the thing they need in order to get to the line, right? We're not even talking about getting past the line right now, which we do know, as Dr. Pierce was saying about just power and privilege, some people are past the line. We're trying to get everyone to the line. So I think that, she's right on point about how we have to educate and make sure that we have a common language that we understand as a board when we are going out and speaking about it to the community.
Go ahead, Board Member Cole.
Thank you. Now I understand the question a bit better. So the question was really around perception. And thank you so much, Board President, for giving that clarity, because I wasn't sure about the question. One, I want to say that where I appreciate this conversation, I'm not so much about equity, I'm about liberation. I've said it before and I'm gonna say it again. I'm about liberation. Eliminate the barriers, right? Let's do more than level the playing field and be equal. Let's be liberate. Let's liberate each other. And I hope that we, identify that throughout the process of this conversation and moving forward. Secondly, I use these opportunities where folks come up and share their issues on the lack of equity in the district, the unequal distribution of resources, unfair imbalance, those types of things, particularly around perception. So if they feel like they're coming here and they're at some sort of loss, I actually speak against that. And I speak against it to make it a teachable moment that we typically know the schools that are succeeding. We talk about CAS. We talk about, any Columbus North International. We talk about all these different schools, Cole, Kenwood, that are doing well and have great students and great parent involvement. But we don't know enough. Too much of our community don't know enough about the other gyms within the district as well that typically aren't thought of because of the neighborhood they're in or something to that effect, thought of as doing well or having the same kind of culture and building vibrancy. So I use it as a teachable moment as much as I'm in tune and listening to what their concerns are.
Okay. And I, of course, just bring that up because you all may come under fire as we continue with this work, because that definitely can happen. And there's a quote I've heard recently that says, when you have privilege, equity feels like oppression. So you'll have to potentially, interact with community members, families, whatever, that even some of our principals who may be in some of the schools that you mentioned, or others who may feel the brunt of that and may voice it in that way.
Well, let me just say, and I'm not going to hark on it. I would encourage them to read the article that was sent. Take a look at the 17 pages that I had to read. Then you'll find, first and foremost, that this is really an opportunity to engage as partners and build together, reimagine a school district that you either graduated from yourself or your children are attending or could have the possibility to attend. This is not the opportunity to point fingers and look at your board who live in this community, who pay taxes in this community, who have babies in this community, and look at them and scoff at them as giants on the hillside making decisions. Right. So I would encourage folks to read. Thank you.
And that's a good segue into the next quote, actually, just talking about that new engine piece. So the chapter, for those in the public, kind of gave that first quote. This is how education has been. Typically, this is what we need it to be. So would anyone care to please read this quote for me?
I'll read it. A new engine. School reforms have focused almost exclusively on modifying our current K-12 system, what I call the old engine, which was designed and built in the early 20th century to do a very different job than the one we are asking schools to do today.
Thank you. So thinking about that piece about modifying the current system versus creating something completely new and different, kind of breaking apart what we have typically thought about education and the purpose of it, and just thinking about how does it need to be different, and what can we do to actually make it different? Because every system is designed to reinforce itself. And so is it that we can really make a change, or are we pushing against a larger idea that maybe won't change? So does anyone have any ideas about that one? You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Yes, I do. I think we have some difficulties and some challenges, I guess, in our ability to do that. Even if we could imagine and come up with a plan for here's what we would ideally like to look like and how we can achieve excellence and equity both through this plan, there are so many regulations on us, so many laws and rules, so many other organizations, mostly governmental, that have a lot of say in the matter, whether it's the General Assembly or the state superintendent. We have to, I think, as we go through this, recognize the things that we cannot change and work on the things we can change. We have to take those things that we can't change and come up with a strategy that might help us, within this climate of all those exterior challenges. But again, recognizing that we'll have to stay within that until we can perhaps get them to change, and they may not.
One of my previous professors at Ohio State, Dr. Patty Lather, would talk about working within and against. So think about it in those terms. How do you work within the system, but also against the system at the same time? Dr. Pierce? You still up from last time? Okay.
I am. It just takes me a second to unmute. So I think this is a very unique question and a timely question. Both Board Member Brown and I attended the Ohio School Board Association Urban Network meeting today. And that meeting focused on the I Promise concept that is being utilized in Akron. And a number of our other sister or Big 8 districts are doing that as well. But the thing that stuck out to me the most in their invitation for districts to come and see what they're doing and see how they were able to create this new engine was the idea around the partnership between school districts and the city council and the mayor's office. And it's really beyond the partnership, beyond the let's make a call and you come to a press conference and we open schools together, but the changing of policy and the creation of charters within our city charter that dictate and help provide guidance for creating an equitable school system, right? So for me, my response to this creation of a new engine is, what are those opportunities that are out there for us to meaningfully partner with our local governing bodies, our sister bodies, being city council, being the mayor's office, to create and develop citywide policy that will really support, reinforce what we intend to do in our district. And so for me, that's a big piece. How do we begin to move towards those type of policy changes and really meaningful partnerships in meaningful ways?
All right, thank you.
I really like what Dr. Pierce just said, because I think that achieving equity is really a community responsibility. You know, the schools are just one piece of the overall community, and it makes sense for us to be the locus of the work of the whole community, because we have the children, you know, present, and it's a point of contact for, but doing it as a community, approaching it as a community, approaching kind of bigger than education, and, you know, this whole, I think. And I think it's even beyond, or maybe it's not beyond the sister government partnership, but then through that galvanizing, you know, the nonprofits, the children's hospitals, all of those other services, and you know, creating new programs that would have to maybe jointly all seek funding for, but there's all kinds of opportunity to approach the new engine with everyone buying.
Is she breaking up or is it me?
Yeah, she's frozen.
Okay.
It's her system. She got to check her connection. But I love how this is both what both my colleagues have shared in terms of that new engine concept. This pandemic has really exponentially kicked that off in so many different respects. And that's, again, alludes to that whole time difference of a generation, literally from the time that this article was written to today is over a generation old. And speaking to how this new engine works and providing Chromebooks for students, and the city making those appropriations to help us fill gaps. The hotspot piece where the corporate community stepped up. Yes, we're paying, but the corporate community did step up to make affordable means for us to provide those for the community. You got local higher education, like Columbus State Community College, that are stepping up and saying that we see that there is a possibility of senior success gap, and we want to help close it and ensure that our public school seniors are graduating. This is what this is in effect. And even to an extent, the ownership of it. I loved your exercise questions that asked us, what does this equity policy look like when the business community or the community or family or schools get involved? And my key send back to you on that was ownership. ownership through investment, ownership through modeling the way, ownership through reinforcement and enforcement. This makes a lot of sense to me, and I love how we're seeing it happen now in this COVID environment, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
So this whole idea of the new engine, like as I got to this part in the reading, I think you guys have heard me say this, and I know I said it in when we did our videos, that when we made those videos, that in truth, the system of education, the way we perform education has not changed fundamentally since the beginning. And I think what struck me most is it was designed to do something different than we need it to do now. So back in the early 1900s, it really was about that kind of mass education, getting kids in and enough so that they could get to work in the factories. And it really wasn't about achievement. The few that achieved, that was great, but really we needed people to go work in factories and to do a different type of job than they do now. And, kind of to what Board Member Brown was saying, for me, and I guess maybe because I also, I do this work every day, I can't just be like, we can't change the system. The thing is, we got to change the system or it's not going to work. How we change it and the process to change it and, how long does it take? I think that's part of what our policy role is and governance role. And just how, Dr. Pierce was saying this and Board Member Beckerly, it can't just be us. There's no way, because all of our systems are intertwined. Education is intertwined with the social services, with health, with all of that. And we know how complex the needs of our students are now. And then we have this mandate, really, this need to create students, our portrait, right? That can go out and be these really creative thinkers, because as they enter the job market, we're told we need a different type of a worker. And so, I don't know how it starts, but we have to work really hard to figure out how do we actually change the system? And it has to be a national conversation. We're talking about the American education system. And I guess, as I read through this, I talked about it this way, but I really liked that kind of idea and that thought process around this idea that the schools of the early 20th century were really designed to batch, process, mass produce. And that's not the way we talk about education today.
Right. And think about just that piece that you mentioned in terms of the system. And of course, it is a much bigger conversation because so many systems are interconnected. So how do we create something new when really a lot of our partners, or whether business partners, community, they come to the table with programming to fix current problems, not necessarily always ideas for changing the system. And we need the programs because we have to, support, provide supports for the students that are in the current system. But what does the conversation need to look like in order to really remove the need for those programs? Go ahead, Dr. Pierce. And then, so Board Member Adair, you were going to respond, and then Dr. Pierce, either one, whichever way you want to do it.
I'm flexible. President Adair, if you want to respond, I can jump in.
Yeah, I'll just respond really quick. I think that that's a really valid question, and it's kind of that like chicken and egg thing, right? I think we've kind of modeled this a little bit in the way that we've approached Portrait of a Graduate and how that has been different and how we're trying to get community buy-in. We're not really talking about specific programs. We're talking about a vision. And that's something that has to continue to be done at all levels, engaging all of the partner systems, government, across the country. There's no way Columbus City Schools is going to do all the things in here that are outlined that could potentially change a system. Like Board Member Brown said, we just have so many regulations that come down from us from the federal and state government. but we could start to try to have those conversations, leverage our partnerships in our national organizations, be a visionary that I know we can be, and start to push. I mean, we have to push. And I think that's our role as policy, people in the policy space of education.
Mhm.
I also think that,
I was just,
Oh,
oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you were.
and then you, yeah, and then you can go after
Go
that.
ahead, Tina.
this is such an engaging conversation. I just wanted to add that, thank you, President Adair, for bringing that quote to the floor to discuss in regards to batch process, mass produce education, and to deliver this bell curve distribution. We also, and it's critically important given the socio-political context and environment in which we live in, have to acknowledge the fact that education has been designed to predominantly teach Black and Brown children how to follow direction, right? It has not been to spark their creativity and give them opportunities. And that's why it's so important that we continue to support our HBCUs and institutions through which you learn your history, through which you highlight the great achievement and successes of Black and Brown people. And so I think as we develop this new engine, we have to be mindful of the realities in which a system has been created to keep a certain community and people, of which I'm a part of, oppressed, and to keep us regulated in a power and privilege paradigm that serves the good of another community and group. And again, that means having those key and critical conversations around how do you begin to advance Black studies curriculums around African culture, around great African kingdoms at not just pre-K level, but all the way through, our pre-K through 12th grade level. How do you start to honor those great ancestors that have contributed to the legacy of America and have not got reparations for that work that we've done to contribute to the society. And so I think in that respect, we have to also be mindful that while in the Industrial Revolution, students were taught to, be able to go into a factory, and when you hear a bell, that alerted you that it was time for a break or that it was time to come to work. Even after that Industrial Revolution, we continued to create a system in which Black and Brown students were devalued and our history not highlighted, again, to help keep them within this frame and this box for the betterment of another community, of another race.
Thank you. Board Member Brown, you still have a comment?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
That last point that Dr. Pierce made goes right to the point that Board Member Cole made about the liberation, right? Mm-hmm. This idea of addressing the systemic issues and racism and bias that have been created intentionally in the way that the systems were built together.
Right. And so then, of course, and this may or may not be kind of at the level of what's the board role, but then you have individuals who make up the system. Some agree, some don't understand it, some won't necessarily agree no matter what evidence you bring forward. So then you kind of have to move in that space of people being in different places about the issues, for sure. So let's look at this. And another thing, Board Member Cole just mentioned, and someone else said this too, that the importance of partnerships that are intentionally designed to be, you said long run, in terms of just a long-term relationship, you mean?
In terms of what Jennifer spoke to, vision-based.
Vision-based,
We all share the same vision for the prosperity of this city. Folks just don't understand why, one of the reasons why people come to a community or a city. In large part, it is because of the health, wellness, and vitality of its school district and how that's going to benefit the child. Well, a lot of cities, urban cities throughout the country have taken hit because of the flight that has taken place, because of systems that were put in place long time ago that systemically, as Dr. Pierce very clearly alluded to, oppress people and were designed to do so. So we want partners who share a long run vision for this city's prosperity and see us as a critical, not just a valuable, not just a viable, but critical partner and leverage in attracting talent and creating talent in this city for the short and for the long run.
And that means we have to be also willing to turn away from partners who may not be able to help us reach that goal. Okay, so this is the last kind of big quote. Can I get a different person to read this one for me? Yeah, you're already off mute. Help yourself.
Yet, a reimagined system must be a braided set of education and support systems that is explicitly designed to meet all children where they are in early childhood and give them what they need: the quantity and quality of instruction, the level of support and opportunity in and out of school to enable them to enter young adulthood ready for success in work, citizenship, and lifelong learning.
Does this feel as huge to you all as it does to me?
Yes.
Okay, good. There's a lot in here. So when we think about what we can kind of glean or pull out that kind of would help us be impactful here in our district, this is, kind of what we said at the beginning. This is what we say that we want. This is part of the spirit of our mission already. So how do we help make sure that something this complex, what are the different ways that you have to kind of think about your role and what you as a board have to be able to manage or govern in order for us to get to a place where we meet all children, early childhood, give them what they need? And what is that? Who decides, what they need? Quantity, all of those things that are there. How do we, because board member Beckerly, you mentioned earlier too, kind of that idea of giving kids what they need. And what does that mean on the ground? How do you all kind of make sense of this quote and that idea of giving kids what they need? How do we operationalize that? It's more than like, and let me just give this example. Here's a Chromebook. Okay, so we have a Chromebook, maybe we have internet, but do we have all of our teachers who know how to maximize instruction using that device? Or do they just kind of replace what they would do in a manual kind of way with the device, and we're not necessarily using the device to really engage and do that creativity that Dr. Pierce mentioned, that problem solving, those sorts of things. So think about those things.
For me, you hit it right on the head. That's kind of where I was going, where you operationalize by systemizing. And we need believers. I think it's to close the belief gap. I got that I'm borrowing that from one of our administrators. Mm-hmm. We have a belief gap that needs to be closed, a belief gap about where we're trying to go, a belief gap about what the capabilities of our students are during the advantageous and adverse times, what their abilities are. And then we need to close the belief gap on what we understand our purpose is in any given perspective role, whether it's as a board member, whether it is as a teacher, whether it is as, a bus driver, whatever, a student, I'm not letting them off the hook either. You have to understand and believe what you're here for. So to me, I think closing that belief gap is the way that you systemize and operationalize how we intend to provide the best we can for our children and our staff.
I couldn't agree more with the belief gap, because I think there's a lot of that goes into being a problem. And that ties into not high enough expectations and a lot of other things. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about this in terms of how do you get them, the students, what they need. And even before you get to your Chromebook example, Dr. Blue, you know, is it enough just to give them a Chromebook? Well, does the teacher have the training, and, you know, where are they in terms of their ability to use it? Yeah, there's that whole social, emotional, and trauma-informed practices piece. Like, they have to be ready to learn. And I keep coming back to, in terms of the but for, or what to do first, maybe. We have to address building community and addressing, you know, specifically trauma, restorative justice, all of those things, social emotional health. That has to be a priority, I think, before they can, we can even get our students to be their potential, or to achieve their potential. So I think, I don't know if you actually asked this question, but I think making sure that we make sure that students are able to achieve by getting them what they need. And there may be a threshold thing that they need, which is enough community and social emotional supports that they can learn.
Okay, I want to put a pin in that and come back to it. And Board Member Brown, Dr. Pierce has her hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and call on her, and then to you.
Fine.
Thank you so much. So I just, in terms of the quantity and the quality of instruction, I think one of the great things that we've done is to be able to do the portrait of a graduate and move on our strategic plan in terms of outlining our goals and guardrails. So what's that should then lead us to understand what's in our lane and what's not in our lane. And our district is going to, again, have to make a very tough decision to give some things up, right? And I know we want to do that social emotional piece and we want to own it, but if Nationwide Children's Hospital can own it and do a better job than we can do and spread it out through all of our schools and provide a scale of resources that we're unable to do, then we need to trust that community a partner enough to hand it over to them to be able to do that work, to partner alongside of us. And so when it comes to the quantity and the quality, I think one, we have to really know what is our lane of work. We really have to know who our partners are and what's their lane of work, where they're very successful at. I think we have to also be very aware of what suggested state standards are, right? Because for me, those suggested state standards should be our bare minimum. We should be pushing our students 2 to 3 times more than what those state standards are, right? And so I feel that creating a framework through which we understand who our partners are, what their lane is, understanding that if the state level is this, we're going to try to bump it up, but also providing our schools, our families with the flexibility. And I want to say Board Member Cole brought this up last board meeting when indicating that sometimes in some of our classes, we're going to have to roll back the work a little bit if we know that we're stressing students and not giving them, real an opportunity to master material versus just doing material, right? And so, definitely, I think that those elements can help us, deal with this quantity and quality issue.
I think that where Carol ended was one of the places that I wanted to start with a comment, and that is that how do we know what students need? And the only way I think that we can know that is for our professional educators to evaluate and assess each student individually and determine what their needs are. It's the same, and I remember back gosh, I know it's already 25 or 30 years ago. I was a hearing officer for special education for the IEPs and learned how well those were put together with a group of people focusing on a single student. I think that, and even back then, we talked about, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could extend this to all students? And I think the same thing is needed today, is that we take that concept of an individualized education plan. And I don't know for sure if the term portfolio was something that is also attached. But to write a plan for each student based on their needs, and we can do the same with respect to school buildings. And some need something and some need something else. And to a great extent, I think that we need to make sure that everybody is in their own lane and doing what they can. I like that that was brought up with respect to partners, but I think that's also essential. And my colleagues have heard this lots of times before, that board members understand their role. And our role, regardless of what education or background each of us has, our role is not professional educators. And we have to empower and rely and guide our professional educators to get to certain points. But we can't decide, the board members, collectively or individually, can't decide what the needs are for any particular child or for any group of children. And we have to recognize that and step back and let the educators do their jobs to be able to get to that point.
And so and I'm sorry, Dr. Pierce, real quick. So just to clarify one thing that you said, Board Member Brown, and maybe this, I guess, even is a little too maybe what Board Member Beckerly said, but so does that mean that means a teacher does an assessment for every student? That means we have more social workers or more time for social workers to do their work? What kind of things, when we say all 50 or however many students now, 50,000 students we have, are we saying we're going to do individual assessment for every one of them?
Well, I guess I'm not talking necessarily from a practical point of view, or that we have the resources or can get the resources. But ideally, I think that having each student evaluated in much the same way an IEP is developed, that it's not only the teacher, but it's a counselor, it's perhaps an administrator, it's the parents, it's the student themselves, and it takes a team on each one of these to be able to develop that type of plan and determine this is what Johnny needs. This is what another student needs. And then we can go from there to say, how do we provide that? How do we best meet those needs? I don't know that it's doable, and it may be just pie in the sky to talk about doing those individual assessments for every student, but we should at least try to approach that design so that we can provide for the needs in a differentiated way.
Okay, Dr. Pierce, Board Member Beckerly, and then Board Member Cole, I would like for you to respond based on your, if you don't mind. I know you're putting it in the chat, so I don't know if that means you don't want to talk about it, but if you don't mind, but if you do, that's okay.
So I'm going to constructively challenge my colleague, Board Member Brown here. on several points. First, the assessment. That very term in itself starts from a negative connotation, this idea that we need to determine what your needs are, right? And an assessment itself is based upon a lot of assumptions of what a person needs. So let me be specific. If we're assessing a child and we say, how many times do you eat during the day? In my household, you know, I might eat 1 meal a day. And for me, that's what I need to sustain myself. We might fast. A couple of days during the week. But based upon Western ideology and Western standards, if you're not eating 3 meals a day, every day, then you're not meeting a certain criteria for food security, right? And so an assessment assumes a lot when you're going in. So I would caution us to really understand our cultures and to understand our communities to ensure that when we are determining the needs of students, that we have partnered with families and with cultures and with communities to understand what their needs are. Not that we are assuming through a Western paradigm what those needs are, because this paradigm doesn't serve our students. And we know this historically, right? So I challenge him on just one, the term assessment, the assumptions that come behind assessments. Secondly, I challenge you on who is to perform this. What I would like to think is literally an orientation in which we're welcoming families and we're asking those families, what do you need from us? What can we do? What can we provide to help your child be successful, to partner with you, right? And so in my opinion, again, it should be an individual that family trusts and knows. Oftentimes, many of our parents have not had the best experience in school. So one, them coming into a place where it might be a trauma trigger for them, being told to sit and to acquiesce to this teacher who's going through this assessment to tell you what's best for your child, can be an experience for a family, for a parent, that they can be extremely uncomfortable with. So even though you're performing this assessment, you might not get the true truths that family has or what that family really needs, because you have set the stage in such a way that you've offended the core of my being. So you're not going to get what I need and what my child needs. You'll get me going through this process because it's what I have to do to sign my kid up for school, but you're not going to know what my family needs. The last thing that I'll challenge my colleague on, again, just kind of relates to this. And I think more, Dr. Blue, you asked the question of, is it the teacher? Is it the guidance counselor? And I know this is probably something that's challenging for education systems, whether pre-K through 12, higher education, which I'm in, but we need to learn how to cross-train individuals in our schools, so a certain task or job isn't just with that person. So in my role as a professor, there are times where I have to be a guidance counselor, and I have to be able to, through my emotional intelligence, sense and tell when a student might need to go see a counselor, or sense and tell if I need to tell a student where the food bank is in Lincoln Tower, or sense and tell if I need to take a student out to dinner and say, baby, let's talk, what's going on with you, right? So we can't so much let tasks be assigned to a certain title or a certain person in a building, that whole school, that whole community, when they see something going on in a child's life, they don't wrap their arms around them and hug them. I'm sorry, that was probably a lot, but that's
If I could just quickly respond to one point, and that is, I wanted to make clear that when I used the term assessment, I did not use it as a term of art. I did not use it as educators might use the term. I was talking generally about evaluation or assessment or a variety of things. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask Board Member Beckerly, go ahead and make your quick comment, and then we can move on. And Board Member Cole, you get off the hook this time. I'll catch you next on the next one.
I think just to follow up on this bit about, as a special ed teacher, I always thought that every child should have their own education plan. And I think that is something that I'm sure Dr. Pierce would agree with, and it just needs to be done right. And maybe not on as you enter the building, and but over time, if it's done well. And I think to that point, this whole new engine idea and the tools we have now in terms of technology, like, so for example, Panorama. I mean, to my understanding of that program, that it is a very powerful tool if we use it well. And now that we have devices in every house and the capacity to engage with families in a way that, brings down some of the barriers, to Dr. Pierce's point about how parents who have negative experiences in school and are reluctant maybe to come in and engage, now we can engage them at home. So all of the possibilities of coming up with this braided approach, I think, we have to be intentional about it. But to Eric's point, like, maybe it's just too much. We couldn't possibly do it because we can't afford to do it. We don't have the manpower. I think it's within our sights because of some of these things, some of these technological advances and some of the tools we have. And that makes me really excited, actually.
Okay. And that's a good segue, because we want to think about the what. And I pushed a little bit on that one because I wanted to just make sure that we've thought kind of, is it realistic? Is it doable? Is it even something that we really should be doing? And as we think about equity specifically, a lot of times, and I think it was maybe Dr. Pierce who kind of mentioned this, but a lot of times we do make assumptions about what it is that kids need. So, or our adults or whoever. And so we just want to be mindful and thoughtful as we talk about needs and fulfilling needs and giving folks what they need, that we unpack that just a little bit. So I'm going to move us to the next thing, which is, I will invite you to look at page 188 and 189, and they just go through just 6, ironically, and there's 6 of us, 6 of you today, 6 aspects that they felt really contributed to the performance gains that they made in Massachusetts. And so what I would like for us to do is just alphabetically 1 through 6 to just kind of go through, look at that piece and unpack a little bit for whichever one you have. What would it look like for us in CCS to think about leadership differently, think about expectations differently, and keep it at the high level, but also at that thoughtful kind of governance level. So 1 through 6, we will say, and I am not the best at alphabetical order, but I'm going to try this. So Adair, and then Beckerly, Brown, Cole, Pierce, Ragland. I think I got everybody. So go ahead and take a minute if you want to think about it, and then you can kind of go in order and just look a little bit if there's anything within this piece that kind of stands out in terms of how we can apply it. And then President Adair, I'll let you kick it off whenever you are ready.
So I think mine probably is the easier one, to be honest with you. So yeah, leadership, what worked for Massachusetts, and I think the way that we are starting to move in the governance structure of the board is to really, strengthen our leadership through collaboration and partnership with co-leaders. This goes back to the conversation that we just were having. There's no way we can do this by ourselves. And it's about being strategic and connecting to the right partners and leaders, and not just to implement, but to vision, right? To figure out where we're going as a community. And those are things that we have started. And what the leadership in the Massachusetts case, why it was successful there is because the leaders and maybe more leadership positions, because the leaders actually did change over the time period we looked at it, that vision remained. And it was embedded into the work, and they all held each other accountable. So it wasn't just the people involved, it was the actual leadership positions. So, each governor that came in, each school board that came in, each business that came in, because it was multifaceted across different areas, but it was also not tied to individual people. It became embedded into what they were doing, and to really kind of look at it more holistically and continue to push the campaign, push the reform, and hold everyone accountable. And so I think, in our talk, I feel like this board is kind of on that path as well. We're looking at, especially in our Columbus community, to really try to become more visionary with our partners and be more strategic and really work towards that kind of shared idea that worked well in this part of the Massachusetts strategy.
Thank you. And so then just real quick to clarify something, or to maybe ask a little bit of a question to that one. When you think about the nonpartisan piece, or the kind of embedding it so that, whenever you all exit the board for whatever reason, that still these same ideas can stay. Another person won't come and say, hey, that's not the vision anymore, we're going to change it. How do we really embed this in that way?
Yeah. So, it's part of, again, like what we've been doing. It's a shared community vision, which makes it more difficult for an individual to come in and make that sort of change. And the more that it does get embedded into the culture of who we are and what we believe as an organization, as a community, as sister governments, as everything, it will be more difficult to just change on a whim of who the person is, because the system will shift and the culture will shift and begin to hold itself more accountable. And so that has to happen. It must embed. It must be a culture shift in the way that we continue to talk about and embrace this if we truly want to see change. Because as we will go through the rest of this and in our conversation, it cannot just be us and the administration and even leaders within our building. It just isn't going to work. It's going to take more than that. And it's a culture shift of our whole city and community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, number 2, are you ready?
Perfect segue into my topic. Because even before Jen just said that last part, I thought, and the way we embed it is by having this clear rationale, and in particular, really being intentional and thoughtful about tying the economic and the excellence and the equity arguments in that. This isn't, while there are plenty of moral and, arguments for achieving equity, and righting past wrongs. There's a lot of history. There's all kinds of reasons we should do equity. But truly, there's also another reason, which is if we don't, or maybe said this way, we can't afford as a community, a greater Columbus community, to not capitalize on the wealth of this huge segment of our population. Because we're not getting the best and the most and the contributions that our kids are capable of giving us in terms of new innovation, in terms of leadership, in terms of running companies. And so it really is about economic growth. And we can't afford to not elevate our students to be the best they can so they can give back to our community. And we're cutting off a huge segment of our community by not making sure that they don't get what they need in order for them to achieve. And if we want to be the city that everybody wants to go to in the whole country, and all these other things, that our community hopes for our city. This is important to that, and we need to connect all of those things in such a way so that our drive for excellence, our drive for equity drives the economy. And so that everyone is invested in making this happen. And the better we connect that, the more embedded it will be, because everybody will see that they're invested.
All right, good, thank you. And then how does that segue into high expectations and standards?
High expectations and standards and high stakes to some extent is I think an interesting topic and a challenge. First, I think we need to define, what we mean high expectations of who. Is it high expectations for our students? Sure, we have those. High expectations for our teachers. We have to have those. And high expectations for all the rest of the staff and administrators and for ourselves. I think that we need to develop a culture that embodies high expectations in everything. And what do we mean? I think that has to mean to some extent that people can perform and meet standards that they're capable of reaching, standards that they've done their best. And to the extent that for teachers, staff, administrators, if they're not capable of doing better, and that's not enough for us as a district, we have to be prepared to say either, no, we're not going to hire you. We're going to go out and find somebody more capable of getting higher, or we're going to try to discipline or fire or coach out of their jobs the employees that can't meet our standards, even if they're working to the extent of their own ability. When we get to those things like discipline and other penalties, we're talking about doing that in a world that includes collective bargaining agreements. And that makes that very, very challenging. And at the same time, we have to do it to the extent possible. I think that we can make it high stakes in some fashion, and I think we have to creatively develop what that means and do that as partners with our labor organizations. And then finally, with respect to students, and I think that we have to, again, create this culture that excellence counts in everything. But we can't set those standards and expectations so high that our students are going to fail along the way. What we want for them is for each of them to do their best and develop and be successful to the extent of their ability and their talents. And we have to be able to constantly revise those standards for each student over time. So it's a challenge to get there, but I think that we need to do it. And part of that is just, I think an important part is creating the culture that supports excellence. I think part of that is also dealing with people in good faith, that you assume from the get-go that everybody is a willing worker and wants to do a good job, unless they prove otherwise, and we have to trust them to do that. Thanks.
So I just want to throw out a caveat, maybe just a revision to what you said to think about is for one, our high expectations, we have to be clear on what that looks like, because high expectations may be different for different people. But then also, if I think that you can only reach a certain goal because I have bias that is unexamined and that it may be unconscious or conscious bias, then you're really not reaching your full potential based on what you might be able to do if I could close that belief gap that Board Member Cole talked about. So there's sort of that balance of, we have to have high expectations, but we also have to be clear on what that does and doesn't look like. And we also have to be able to examine the impact of bias and structural racism in how some of those decisions have been made and those expectations have kind of played out in the past. And
I agree fully. Yeah.
All right. And so we move to significant investment in building capacity and achieving financial equity. Board Member Cole.
Awesome. I think that number 4 ties very intricately into number 2, that kind of E-cubed model of economics, excellence, and equity. To me, one of the things that we need to do is really encourage our partners, our decision makers around education, is that it is clearly an investment. It is clearly an investment. And the benefit we have is that businesses can be saying that alongside of us. Our industry sector leaders, employers can be saying that right alongside of us, that this investment in education by the state, by the federal government, by local taxpayers like everyone who's on this Zoom call right now, it is an investment in human capital for the short run and for the long run. So I think it's important that we get everybody to look at it from that economic premise of investing in people for the prosperity of a community and not just a budget line item. Building capacity also means, for me, training and development comes to mind. And that is of our staff. That is of, bringing community into that exercise as well. Ohio is a really cool state in that we offer, everybody else is focused on GED. And I don't know how many people know that Ohio is a 22 plus state that offers and still encourages, whether you're 22 to 102, a high school diploma. A high school diploma that's also tied to workforce standards and seals that come with that, and credit that could be accrued based on, some other supplemental experiences that tie into a workforce narrative. Most folks don't know that, but Ohio is great at that. Well, how do we leverage that to help continue to not only build capacity with our staff, but also build the capacity and experiences for our children that can also be applied. These are applied experiences as much as they are classroom related. So when I think about building capacity and human capital, that immediately comes to mind. Achieving financial equity. This has been a question for, as maybe a few years. Well, I think maybe my senior year of high school. Yeah, my senior year of high school, I think it was the first DeRolf decision. It was most assuredly in the early 90s. I'm looking at your eyes, Eric. Am I off? Either way, I think that the financial equity piece is, again, encouraging our legislative decision makers, the governor, and pressing on the community to say that let's make a real investment based on economic need, based on economic vitality, based on where we're trying to go as a state, where we're trying to go as cities and surrounding communities, and where education plays a role in that. Fair investment into public school districts, not this thing that we have right now. And I'm not trying to sound partisan, because I don't. I'm kind of fed up with politicizing public education. Whether it's partisan or nonpartisan, it's still politicized, and we need to stop that. But I do know that there was a guy who did try to at least engage it from an evidence-based model. And I know we have a current administrator who was a part of that movement at the time. But that's when I think about these things, I think about human capital. I think about fair and equitable investment into public education, and not seeing it as a line item, but seeing it as an investment in people that will ultimately bring prosperity to a community. And I'm not just speaking aspirationally, I'm speaking very functionally, because this is what employers want too.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Dr. Pierce, policy, I know you're ready to talk about that.
I'm so ready. I'm excited. So an inclusive approach, at the end of the day, this means, making sure that all of our stakeholders are coming to the table and being able to, in consultation, in partnership, lean in and give their feedback for the policies that we are creating and how we are evaluating those policies. And what sticks to me is that you're challenging us today to say, what does that look like in our district? And so I'm currently reading Leadership's Fourth Evolution. And I want to share this quote, because this quote is literally what we need to do in this district to get us to point 5, inclusive approach to policy and implementation. And so this quote, it says, leadership's fourth evolution, from hierarchy, power, control, and fear, to collaboration, psychologically safe, trust, and ownership. This evolution is about creating leadership cultures that empower people to be their best selves so they can do their best work to create superior results. This evolution is about developing a generation of leaders who are principled, ethical beyond reproach, self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and have developed a range of collaborative skills that enable them to empower others. That's what inclusive approaches to policy and implementation looks like to me. So again, no longer this hierarchy, this power, this structure paradigm that says you brought to the table when I'm ready for you to be brought to the table, but a culture in which everybody knows they have ownership in the process that is taking place so we can achieve the superior results that we need.
Mm-hmm. All right. And this maybe is not for this particular conversation, but I do want to call out the point that it also says in this regard, unions were seen as partners rather than adversaries in the reform process. And that's going to be important too. When you talk about collaboration, we have to all be thinking about collaboration in the same way. And what other partners, those partners that are also at the table that help us with the kind of the enterprise of our work, how can we change that culture amongst all of us?
And that's where I think that quote from Leadership's Fourth Evolution is so powerful and important, because it's that psychologically safe, that trust, that ownership, right? So let's just acknowledge, even at this point, does our union feel safe? Do they feel listened to? Do they feel trusted? Do they feel like they have ownership right now, right? We have to shift that culture so they believe and know that that's a part of our culture, not that it's a part of this moment in time, but it's a part of our culture, right? And not just to the unions, but to our parents, to our community partners, to our faith-based partners, to those caregivers that still live in the community that might not have a child that goes to our schools, right? It extends to everybody.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Ragland.
Thank you, Dr. Blue. Long-term commitment by various partners. The sentence says here, governors, the legislature, business groups, education advocacy groups, the media, urban superintendents, and many others maintain long-term commitments to implementing the work of education reform. This to me goes right back to number one in our segment here with leadership. It says deep, diverse, persistent, consistent, and nonpartisan. And I'm glad that my colleague, Mr. Cole, stood on the nonpartisan side of things because I do believe that we do have a highly politicized educational culture here within the state. But when it talks about long-term commitment by various partners, as it relates to us locally, we've talked a little bit about it tonight. Some of our other governmental partners, including the city, the county, and others, are nonprofit partners. And I believe that our administration has done a really good job of talking to our nonprofit partners around alignment and what that means to the district's results for student achievement moving forward. We had some very tough conversations around alignment with some of our nonprofit partners. And you had said this earlier, Dr. Blue, when you talked about turning away from partners that may or may not help us to reach our goals. And all of this is based in the context of leadership and long-term commitment for me, because what occurred when Dr. Dixon came on, we had identified some partners that weren't necessarily meeting the goals of the district. Now, as we talk about a deep, diverse, persistent, consistent, and nonpartisan culture, we all understand that the realities of some of these things, when we are talking about alignment, who's doing what, who we want to keep, who we don't want to keep, who we need to ask to adjust, there are some political realities that we as board members have to face in the context of all of that. And that has really been kind of the overview of tonight's discussion that I've listened to and taken notes on very closely today, because we've said a lot. And I've enjoyed hearing my colleagues in their friendly debates and in their agreements and a lot of the things that we have said. But one of the things that we've got to make sure that we are committed to doing, and we're talking 1 through number 6 in all of this, is making sure that we as a board of education are legislating without care and concern for the consequences of the actions we take for the betterment of our students. If we're talking about equity, and you started the conversation around some of those influencers that will make phone calls, show up at your home, send you emails, and do those certain things that may feel like they would be getting less than. There are consequences associated with making decisions that benefit the greater good. Some of the things that we've talked about here, I do have some disagreements with. I do not believe that individual parents make educational decisions for their students based on the greater good. People just don't do that. They make educational decisions for the students that they live with and have a responsibility for. And they make those educational decisions to give their particular students an advantage over everyone else's student, if they can. Now, it's the role and responsibility of this board to do otherwise, to make sure that everyone else has a leg up. And long-term commitment by various partners is a lot of difficult, very nasty, dirty work that we will have to do in order to change the mindsets of people who are currently our partners, who currently are not our partners, but need to be, and those that would influence us not to bring on those partners that we know that we need, but are currently being kept out of partnering with the district because of other political realities that we all have to face. it's a very deep and intense discussion. And I've heard a lot tonight, and I'm not so sure quite yet that we have the appetite as a Board of Education to engage in even really beginning those discussions with our other, number one, governmental entities, our business leaders, and our nonprofit leaders within this community. It's all well and good here when we can talk about it in a very safe environment under Zoom, but when the rubber meets the road out on the street is where we have to make sure that we are united in pushing this agenda forward, and that is for the long term. And so that is what I took from the discussion around these 6 principles, as well as this specific discussion on number 6.
Thank you, Board Member Ragland. And that's the question. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice on the altar of equity? And that's really the question. And it's big P politics and small p politics, but there are definitely lots of those. And so I can see that it looks like maybe Board Member Cole and Board Member Brown want to make a comment.
I'm happy to let Mr. Brown go first.
I guess what I was thinking as James spoke was that, yes, he's absolutely right. And I don't think that we really have a legitimate choice to make about our willingness to take on this challenging and difficult task. I think that it's a responsibility and it's incumbent upon us to do that and to support our administrators and staff who likewise need to do that. And, I think if a board member said, I've got these other political aspirations, or I've got this employer, or I've got whatever the situation is that prevents them from being willing to engage and be strong in those matters, I think they need to figure that out for themselves and either step down or step away from the board and hopefully find somebody willing who will replace you. But I think that to a great extent, that, and we've talked about this a bit as a board, we have to have the willingness to do the things that we know are needed to be done. And I recognize fully that it's probably easier for me to say that and do that than anybody else on the board, at least at this stage of my life. But at the same time, it's part of our individual character and integrity, and I think that we must.
Thank you both for that. Understanding, I have developed my own definition of what that is that I've taught my children and people around me I even work with and supervise. Understanding is awareness and knowledge of meaning, nature, and significance. Awareness and knowledge of meaning. What do these words mean? What is this nomenclature? What are your terms? Nature. What is the spirit in which you speak? How am I to discern what you said? And significance. What is this impact on the present and the future? How is it tied to the past in some way? But what is the significance of what you're saying? Mr. Ragland, my question is, I don't understand what you mean when you say that the board doesn't have the appetite to have a deliberate, intentional dialogue about what you were saying. I don't understand. Help me understand.
Yes, sir. Thank you for asking for that clarity. I am speaking more of dialogue, more than dialogue. I've seen this board and other boards of education for Columbus City Schools have dialogue on equity for a number of years. A lot of the issues that were brought up here today have persisted over decades within this district. These are not new concerns within Columbus City Schools or in urban education, either in Massachusetts, as our example here today, or in other large scale or smaller municipalities throughout the country. I know that we have an appetite for dialogue. I understand that we have an appetite to talk about it. We say good things. I believe that our intentions are good. However, when the rubber starts meeting the road, the reason why these equity issues have persisted is because boards of education yield to political pressure. Mayors and governors and legislators, that leadership, that deep, diverse, persistent, consistent, and partisan leadership yield to political pressures and realities. We started this discussion about that. We talked around it a little bit, but essentially what Dr. Blue was asking us, when the Northwest quadrant of Columbus starts either knocking on your door or blowing up your email inbox, calling you on your cell phone, or calling your employer, or doing the things that are necessary in order for them as a unit to get what they want for their children, will you persist in saying this time, this will be about equity for every student here, and I am willing to sacrifice myself and my well-being or my board seat for the benefit of these young people to get what it is that they need so that they can finally start moving forward. That is what I mean. For me, the discussion is great. I am so thrilled that we now have a leader that can help drive this discussion. It is my outspoken goal that we supply this leader with a true department so that she's not operating in a vacuum, in a silo by herself, so that the work of equity can get done with not just Dr. Blue, with Dr. Blue and a team that she supervises to do this work, because that shows a commitment for us as well. That shows that we have high expectations for this department. That shows that we're making a significant investment in building capacity for equity here within the district. I've seen us do the opposite. We've talked about LED work and said that that's important for 19 years, 20 years now. We've had one person doing it. I've taken extensive notes, so I do have some examples here. So we talk about the belief gap closure and what that's going to mean. Well, that means that we're going to have to infuse the district with some new people. That means that we have some people here that we know and understand don't necessarily believe in our students and don't believe that our students can achieve some of the things that we want to see them do. And so let's not talk around it. How do we get rid of them and bring some people in here who do believe in our children? How do we get some people in here who do know our children's needs culturally and educationally and put them to the forefront? We've talked about, let's evaluate and assess individual students. Well, we've had an administration that has come to this board and said, I've got an evaluation tool that I would like to see us use with our third grade students who read at a 45% proficiency rate. And then we had teachers march down to the Board of Education and told us they didn't have the contractual hours to implement the program. But we want to talk, and here again, we're talking about evaluating and assessing students. Well, they didn't have the contractual hours to do that. But we talked about it very, very gingerly tonight. Let's work with our partners and let's do all of these types of things. Well, we've been working with our partners for 20 years. We haven't seen any new results. We've been doing these things consistently over time the same exact way. And all I'm saying to all of us here is, are we going to be the board that makes the commitment to say enough is enough? We're going to vote to change all of this. We're going to vote to devote the resources to what it is that we need to do. We're going to vote to make sure that the students who need it more than any other students get it, despite what anybody else has to say about it that's to the negative. Because we know that we're going to get the negativity. We know that. We understand that. That's been the one consistent factor for the time that we've been seeing bad student achievement numbers for Black students in particular. We get the negativity and student achievement gap continues to grow for Black and brown students throughout the city of Columbus. So are we going to be the ones to say enough is enough and finally we're going to do something different? Because we know what that means. We know who's going to line up against us. We know what they are going to do. We know what they are capable of. But are the results for the children going to change? And if we're not committed to that, I'm not here for the dialogue, bro. If we're not committed to doing what is necessary to see these kids grow, that's what I'm talking about. And thanks for allowing me to clarify, brother.
That was a mic drop.
Hold on, because I have my hand up first.
Okay. And Board Member Beckerly.
Thank you. I thank you so much for your impassioned, what you very passionately, very ardently shared. I want to just thank you for clarifying too. I think all of us are in the space of wanting to answer the question, dialogue around it, and subsequently act. What I will say is that I know certainly during our collective tenure, and most assuredly during my personal tenure in this space, in service of this city, in this role, that we have taken as progressively as we possibly can those steps towards equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. Here's the thing though, because I agree with you on, courage of conviction and not being pusillanimous in posture and or action. I get you. But what I'll say to this is it all costs money. We got to put our money where our mouth is. And it's not just the board, it's also sharing a compelling vision that everybody is interested in, which is the importance, the import, the imperative, the paramount attribute of dialogue. Why you come to the table and you talk very openly and deliberately about how we're going to take these steps towards what is real equity in this district. Yes, we have taken the steps progressively, even before you became a board member, to begin discussion around identifying what equity is and developing and bringing on personnel to ensure that. I agree with you that yes, Dr. Blue most assuredly should be operating with a team and we helping her grow capacity in that space. I'm certainly open to taking the superintendent's guidance to that effect. I think she's heard loud and clear that's now an expectation, at least from two of us. But with that in mind, I'll say this, that it starts with dialogue. It starts with building a compelling vision that everybody then is bought into as much as possible, because it takes a majority to do anything, including vote on a bond and levy issue. It takes the majority. So action steps is having this conversation. Action steps is bringing the community to the table to do the same. Action steps is coming forth with a compelling vision that's bold, that's audacious, and that's goal setting with real metrics, not just opportunities for things, but what is the intended impact of the opportunity? We're going to have summer programs. What is its intended impact? how many kids, where, all of that good stuff. No more Philly good, showing a video. Let's put some metrics to it now. Having those kind of conversations, setting the expectations, and then going out and getting it. And then going to the community very boldly and self-assuredly to say, we need this investment. For the cost of a pizza, it's on your $100,000 per value home, we need to get this for our kids to create equity in the district. So that's what it is. So I thank you for that, and I appreciate you challenging us, right? I do, but sometimes we got to be clear about how that is perceived by folks who are hearing it, that we're not doing anything, that we're not taking action, that all we're doing is talking. And then when we don't include them in the conversation for some reason, or they feel as they weren't included in the conversation, now we ain't being collaborative. We're not being transparent. So let's be mindful of our words. Let's figure out how we find the best intent to reach our goals together. And I think we're going to be good. We're going to take the next steps. But I'm as committed towards action. And I think all of our colleagues are, quite honestly, as you are. But I thank you for that. I really do.
All right. So that was great discussion. Board members Cole and Ragland, just FYI, I am going to be building my department in the coming school year. So no worries there.
Yes, ma'am. That
Yes.
is very good to hear, Dr. Blue. Very good to hear.
We're working on it right now. So we have 2 comments on the floor, and we are also nearing our end time for today. We have a lot more to discuss, so we will pick up on our discussion in the very near future. But yes, and we will continue this conversation. So I'm going to go Board Member Beckerly, and then Dr. Pierce, and then President Adair.
I just would like to point out that we have recently flexed this muscle a little bit, and to give credit to the administration and to those of us on the board who had to deal with some pushback from some of the segments of the community that James referenced. We went back, we decided to do the virtual, the hybrid model against the desires of quite a few family, not just, there were other segments of the community, but again, there were parents for whom the remote learning was chugging along just fine, mostly in, as James refers to it, Northwest Columbus. Not entirely. I mean, I got some emails, and I'm sure you guys got the same ones from some other people, but there was clearly a theme that they liked 5 days a week. They were in a position where they could accommodate that and they could support their children. And while it wasn't perfect, why disrupt this for this hybrid model, which, is clearly has its downside in terms of it only being 2 days a week and, all these other things. But it was equity that drove us. It was equity that drove Dr. Dixon. It was needing to connect with those segments of our student population that we weren't otherwise connecting with. It was needing to see them, to, either connect with them for social and emotional reasons, but it was also, there was educational reasons, because some of them needed a little more support in order to get back in the groove of, or to get in the groove of, doing their online work and all of that. And we told the line, and I had a few I had a few difficult conversations with community members where I had to say, we can't afford not to switch to this hybrid model so we can connect with those kids. And, I'm sorry that it might be disrupting what was going along well for your child, but there's far too many kids that we haven't connected with, and this is going to allow us to do this. And I was able to give them some anecdotal stories that I had gathered from my visits with some of the schools the first 2 weeks we were open, and talking to the principals and teachers there. And I said, we have to do this. And similarly, with the discussion about the substitute shortage, that had a lot of families, again, quite a few, from that Northwest quadrant who were upset about the subs, their children being divvied up between other classrooms, and that this wasn't working for them. And the real reality is that is a problem. That's an unacceptable problem. And it's one we need to fix, but it didn't outweigh the need to be in the hybrid mode so that we could connect with those other children. So I think, we didn't really articulate it as flexing that muscle, James, but we were doing it. And I certainly was doing it in terms of communications that I was having with people from the community. So we're starting to work out.
Thank you for that, Madam Beckerly.
So this isn't so much a comment directed to Board Member Ragland for sharing his position, but it is a comment that will challenge it. What I appreciate about this board right now, about my fellow board members and our administration, is that we are having this conversation. And it's been one of many conversations that we've had since I've become a board member. What I also appreciate about this conversation and the actions that we will start to take as we frame the work that needs to be done is that we're doing it in such a way that it's not rushed. We're being very deliberate about the steps and the actions that we will take. That's key and necessary to ensure that it is sustainable and that it has a foundation to lead to success. We live in a time in which we are inundated with 24-hour news, 24-hour standards and datas and how we have to move immediately. Brother Ragland, I'm sure you can appreciate that sometimes the word says you have to be still and wait. You have to be still and work. You have to be still and prepare. And so in this stillness, which I see the stillness as a conversation, as us having the rich dialogue, a dialogue in which, as I recall previous conversations about equity, focus on that equity from a Black-white lens, a purely racial lens. Now we have an equity officer that has allowed us to look at the entire continuum of diversity. That diversity includes class, includes ethnicity, includes race, includes our gender expression, our sexuality expression, our ability levels. We are coming at this conversation with a fuller perspective that allows all of our students and community members to enter into our schools and spaces and be acknowledged as the total human being and person that they are. And so I don't want us to end this conversation in a space where we don't acknowledge what we're doing well right in this moment, the people who are gathered in this moment and having this conversation. Because the way in which we are lining up our resources, the ways in which we are determining the mere language that we will use as we have this conversation, right? So I don't take it as something like that Dr. Blue gave us homework to do, right? She gave us a framework, a foundation, a common language to even come into which to have this conversation. That has not been done before, right? And we have to acknowledge that and acknowledge it in such a way that, yes, while you challenge us to take action, we have to applaud the gains that were made in just this very comment, this very conversation and in this moment. So thank you for that, Dr. Blue.
Thank you. So President Adair,
I think
I'm sorry, Board Member Brown.
Just briefly, and it's interesting. Tina must have been reading my mind because part of what she had to say was exactly what I wanted to talk about and gently bring up with the group. And that is that And I think all of you know me well enough that to understand where I'm coming from with this. But we need to make sure we're inclusive of every different kind of difference among our students, among our families, among our geographic places in the city. That, whether it's age, religion, gender, disability is a big one, Latinos, LGBTQ plus. We have to make sure that we approach equity with all of those in mind. And yes, we have a larger Black minority group than any other, unless we're looking at gender, perhaps. But I think that we need to make sure that we don't focus only on Black and brown to the exclusion of all of the other differences as we work through this. Thank you.
And just real quick, I will say, as a way to kind of wrap up my piece of this, which is the other piece of the homework that everyone had, was to think about what is your definition of equity. And we're gonna, in our next conversation, think about how we can meld those. We want to have something that we can, that's accessible to the general public, that we can kind of talk about easily, as well as maybe a longer, more academic sort of definition. However, we won't get to that obviously today, but we are going to dig into those things and really come up with something that we can all understand, as this is the way that we're going to talk about equity in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Blue. I hope we also, in this, for those that may have been following along with us and haven't had a chance to read the selection that you had for us, we talked a lot about the positive things that happened in Massachusetts, but we haven't yet got to the fact that it actually didn't work. There was a lot of, when they were really trying to address those gaps, they found that even though scores and things went up, in the end, it didn't actually get to the thing that they were trying to fix. So I can't wait to keep talking about this. I think it's really good to have these kind of dialogues, as some of my colleagues said, and really start to shape our language around this. And we're just really excited that you're here, Dr. Blue, and can lead us through this. I do want to give our superintendent a moment to share some thoughts. I think she had some things she wanted to share before we close out. So, Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, Board President Adair, and to the board members, and thank you, Dr. Blue. This has been great dialogue. I just want to remind the board and our audience that I think one thing that we have to be mindful of when we're doing this work, and it kind of goes back to the title of this book, when it says Excellence Through Equity, the Principles of Courageous Leadership. And having done this work before, I remember when the board selected me as the 21st superintendent, equity was a framework that they knew that I had worked on and facilitated in Cleveland Heights. And it started from a conversation to working on a project. And that project was us working with a national organization and challenging the organization to look at more African Americans students taking AP. It then led to a equity strategy as part of our strategic plan. Then it also led us to putting equity and diversity training as part of our bargaining unit. Teachers in Cleveland Heights had to receive that training. And then ultimately led to a policy. We was the first school district in Cuyahoga County to adopt an equity policy. And I say all that to say, I understand the importance of this work, and I understand the dialogue. During my entire career, I think the times that I've cried publicly the most is when we were doing equity work. It is hard work. It's not easy. It's not something you do in one conversation. So I applaud everything everyone has said. I knew when I came to the district, and there was a couple strategies I set out front that we would have. We would lead in equity work, and I would have a chief of equity. And we remember that position sat vacant for an entire year because I knew that we had to be intentional about doing this work. And we had too many other things that we needed to do my first year. But the time was right when we looked intentionally for a leader to lead this work, and she will have support. She's already asked for some team members, so I've already approved that. But the work is too important, and that's why I love this dialogue. I love the conversation. We will be a leader in equity. We're going to be equity leaders, no doubt in my mind. Everything we do, we're going to do it with excellence. We're going to be intentional, and we are changing the conversation already. So thank you for your support. Thank you for Dr. Blue again for engaging us in this dialogue. This book is a powerful book. I have the first edition. You're going to learn so much just from reading and allowing us, you're seeing it for the 50,000 foot view and from a governance perspective, but it's going to inform so much. It changes the lens of our work. So it's been great dialogue. I just wanted to say that thank you to the board for your courage to have this dialogue and ongoing dialogue, knowing that we have to change the system. And we're talking about big, bold, audacious goals and having the courage to have the conversation. And then hopefully at the end, there's a policy that we will go back and revisit and look intently of what are we doing? What are those metrics? Everything that you've stated, we're going to get there. We're going to get there together by continuing to have these courageous conversations. So I just wanted to add that and just thank you for everything that you're doing. You're a great board.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. And again, thank you for your leadership through this. We are going to continue the conversation. We have a lot more to talk about with Dr. Blue, and I look forward to that. I also look forward to more homework. So it was fun. All right. So with that, all we will need then is a motion to adjourn our meeting. Is there a motion?
I move we adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you by Dr. Pierce. Please call the roll.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Ragland,
Yes.
President Adair.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you next week, I believe, at our board meeting. That's the next meeting, I think. So see you all then.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
We